VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Crosstalk, and we have an interesting program today. Don't go away, because on deck we have one of the biggest friends that the church, the community, the conservative community, and those who stand for righteousness could ever have, and that is Liberty Counsel, represented today. And I remember over some years ago, I had the privilege of serving for about 10 years on their board of directors, and every time we'd come to a board meeting, there'd be a thick, almost like a book, of all the cases they dealt with, everything from a letter of notice to a full-blown litigation case. And as God has used Liberty Counsel, we're so grateful. And today, Matt Staver, the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, is our guest, an international nonprofit litigation, education, and policy organization. Is dedicated to advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of life, and the family by providing pro bono assistance and representing those topics and others. And Matt has argued cases in all levels of the justice system, all the way to the Supreme Court. And Matt, it's a privilege to have you on deck today.
Well, Vic, it's always good to be with you. Good to be with you today.
Well, Matt, there's a whole bunch of questions I've got for you, because there are things, it's like popcorn, things developing. And if we go to South Carolina and see Senator Jim DeMint is stepping down from the U.S. Senate, it's going to be taking the helm of the Heritage Foundation. Do you think his departure from the Senate is going to leave a void?
Well, I think he's been a very strong voice for conservative values in the Senate, so I think it will definitely leave a void. I'm surprised it actually is coming up in the middle of his term like this, and I guess he's only going to be there for another month or so, and then he'll be taking over at the Heritage in April. Now, he'll certainly be in a great position to have an impact around the country and long-term at Heritage, so I understand the move, but having someone like Senator Jim DeMint in the Senate and then losing him is going to be a big void. So obviously they're going to have some kind of replacement, and hopefully we get somebody that has as strong a value system and is as courageous as Jim Mint has been in the past.
Well, and that's a good thing for people to pray about, because as leaders are rising and stepping aside and whatever, that God would raise up leaders that would defend the faith and defend liberty.
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's other people, obviously, that can step in the shoes and a younger generation, but just, you know, there's very few people that are as strong and as principled as Jim DeMint, and he's always been that way, and he's not wavered, and we just need to have someone that actually can come in and fill those big shoes. I'm sure we can get one, but those are big shoes to fill, and he's been one of the stalwarts in the Senate for some time, and always on the typically on, you know, pushing these values and not afraid to articulate them. So it's going to be a big loss, I think, in the Senate and a big shoes to fill, but his presence at Heritage will certainly have a big impact around the country, no question about that.
Now, Matt, over the years here at VCY America, we've had people contact us, stories that have been shared with us about people who have been involved in the homosexual lifestyle and have ultimately found God's truth and the strength to turn into a normal lifestyle. There are people who spend very, very, very meaningful ministries counseling those, sharing with people that their life can be changed and that they can have a normal lifestyle. And I mean, it's the homosexual movement that's branded themselves as queer. That was not, I mean, that was their own moniker that they've developed. But somehow we're in the mix. There's come up this issue called change therapy. And you were in federal court in California last week challenging the implementation of the change therapy law. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. It goes into effect on January 1, so less than 30 days from now, it goes into effect in California. And what happens is, effective January 1, counselors may not provide, nor minor clients receive, any counsel whatsoever under any circumstances that is designed to change or reduce or eliminate your same-sex sexual attractions or your same-sex sexual behavior or activity, any of that. And any such attempt to do so would be an ethical violation by the counselor, and they would be subject to discipline and the loss of their license. So I was in court, in federal court. We filed this case just a few days after the law was signed by Governor Brown at the end of September. And so on Friday of last week, I was in federal court arguing this issue. And this week, two judges in the same Sacramento federal court system came down with two different opinions. One judge, who was appointed some time ago and is in senior status, he's a Republican appointee, ultimately ruled, correctly so, that the First Amendment bars this claim because it's an infringement on their right to freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. And the other judge, the Obama appointee, ultimately ruled that there is no First Amendment issue here. And tough. That's no problem. So we are now today and tomorrow, we're working on filing an emergency appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to get an injunction pending appeal, because the one judge that entered the injunction, it did it only for the three people in that case, so it doesn't affect the rest of the Californians. So we're now going to the Federal Court of Appeals. We've got less than 30 days to get an injunction to stop this. Here's what's going to happen, Vic. The likes of a Jerry Sandusky, the monster that he has been on the media around the country, molest a young boy. Mm-hmm. That boy then begins to have anger and identity issues and affects his relationship with his classmates and then with his parents, then begins to act out or have feelings towards somebody of the same sex because that's how he was abused. That's how he was dominated. Mm-hmm. And that's a normal response for someone going through something like this, where they've been sexually dominated. Now, he comes to a counselor to try to stop these feelings, to avert them, to not act on these feelings. They're unwanted, wanting help from the counselor. Effective January 1, the counselor is going to have to say, it's no problem. These are natural and normal. Just go with it. But the person says, but I don't want to. I've got religious values and moral values that say this is wrong. Well, the counselor is going to have to say, we're going to have to work on those religious and moral values. That's the problem. These attractions, this behavior, this activity, that's normal. Your religious and moral values are going to have to change. That's the damage that young boys and girls are going to receive after January. This is outrageous situation.
You know, Matt, the philosophy that this is the way you were made, don't mess with it. I had, some years ago, a young man in this very studio who was attending an evangelical church in the area, and he was living the homosexual lifestyle, but came to Christ and was counseled and saw the error of his way, and struggling then to find meaning and purpose. And would you believe a pastor of that church said, well, I hate to rain on your party, but or rain on your picnic, but he says, you were made that way. And he sat here in this studio with real tears coming down his face. He said, I know that I wasn't made that way. He says it started because there was some molestation, and it excited the prurient interest, and that was where the whole chain of events. But there are counselors out there, too, just like what you described, and some of them you're finding in religious circles.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. You know, what happens, sometimes some situations, and there are studies that show that some minors, for example, that might develop these same-sex sexual attractions, they go away spontaneously. They go away without any intervention at all, and they just simply go away. Now, what happens if you have situations like that where someone says, hey, it's natural and normal, go ahead and act on it? Well, no, it's not natural and normal, and in fact, it's abnormal. It's risky. The Center for Disease Control shows how risky it is, showing how much 4 times the rate of disease that you have with regards to disease as well as mental health problems from this. So it is not natural and normal, and to suggest that it is absolutely unbelievable. What California is saying is, effective January 1, it's going to barge into every counseling office through this law and tell the counselor, you can only say to this client that same-sex attractions are good and normal. You can't even address the behavior. And if you do, it's an ethical violation. To the clients and to the parents, the minors, and to the parents of these minors, California is going to say, we know best, and I don't care what you're wanting. I don't care if you're having benefit from it. You can't have it anymore. We represent some minor young boys, 15 years of age. One's been in counseling for 16 months. The other's been in counseling for about 4 months. Both of them have had exceptional benefits. Their anxiety level has gone down. Their self-esteem has gone up. Their relationship with their peers have increased. Their family relationships and dynamics have actually been healing and doing very good. They are afraid that on that the counsel that they get on December 31 will be 180 degrees different on January 1, and that will be a huge setback. It is interfering with every counselor and client relationship in the state of California. It's unbelievable. Senator Lieu, the sponsor of this bill, says, yes, we intended to interfere with parental rights. That's exactly the point of this bill, and that's his words.
You know, Matt, when you think of the counselors, there are good counselors out there too, but they're being forced to teach something that is 180 degrees in reverse of what they believe. I mean, or say nothing or get out of the practice. I can think of over a decade ago where there were people, even in the educational world and those with liberal mindsets on this topic, that said, well, experiment with your sexuality. Experiment. Find out really what your feelings are. And they've encouraged lewd and lascivious behavior. And as I said, once you excite the prurient interest in a human being, and with no moral standards, no values, you end up with Sodom and Gomorrah.
That's right. That's exactly what you end up with. And this is absolutely damaging for counselors, for example. Just imagine counselors in this situation. Counselors will be disciplined. It's historic because it's never been done before, where the government comes in and says, this one particular viewpoint on this subject matter you can no longer address. Out of anything else that a counselor can address, there's only one viewpoint. You can address the subject matter of same-sex attractions and same-sex activity and behavior, but you can't address it from the standpoint of reducing or eliminating. You can only affirm it, applaud it, say it's fine, normal, natural, and good. You can't do it from any other perspective. So these counselors that have religious and moral perspectives, it's a direct collision with the law. These clients who have a right to receive the kind of counseling that they want and is benefiting them, they will be told, no, you can't have that anymore. The only kind of counsel that you can get is that these confused feelings that you have that you don't want, don't worry about them. Just act on them. Let's change your religious and moral views instead.
That's like saying to the pyromaniac, go ahead and try it again. Flaming emotions and passions. We're going to be back with Matt Staver in another minute. We shall return.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, will dinosaurs ever be cloned?
Chris, I'm absolutely confident that dinosaurs will never be cloned, although I might like to be proven wrong. In order to clone a dinosaur, you'd have to take the egg out of a living female dinosaur, strip it of its DNA, and then add in the DNA from the dinosaur you want to clone. The egg in the host uterus would have to be from a living dinosaur in order for this egg to grow, and of course you'd already have to have a living dinosaur DNA donor too. That's not going to happen. Bottom line is, you must have a dinosaur to clone a dinosaur. You just can't work with dead ones. Remember, dinosaurs were created on day 6 of Creation Week, back in Genesis.
If you want to know more about the creation evolution issue, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. Back to Genesis is a production of the Institute for Creation Research. I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where today we are visiting with Matt Staver, the founder and chairman of the Liberty Counsel, an international nonprofit litigation or educational organization, which is a strong defense. And many times people have said it's like the opposite of the ACLU. Well, it's more than that. It deals with the values that have made this country what it is, and they're striving to protect the liberties that we have and have had. But if we're not careful, we're going to lose every one of them. Matt, we were talking, of course, about this change therapy law and what's going on. And, of course, as I said, even during the break, Ninth Circuit, lots of luck, Well,
this law is so outrageous that I don't see how in the world a court could eventually uphold this. I think it's eventually just going to go. I think there's just no way you can uphold it. There's a case out there. Actually, it's a federal court of appeals case at the Ninth Circuit in 2002, so it's not that old, that actually involved a federal regulation that said doctors could not recommend to their patients in California medicinal uses of marijuana. They could say things that would be negative regarding marijuana, but not any potential medicinal uses of marijuana. Well, doctors sued, saying that interferes with the doctor-patient relationship. It tells the doctor what he or she can say. And a lot of that's up to the client anyway as to whether or not just education about this information is actually recommendation. So it depends upon what the client or the patient thinks. They may be violating the law. And the Federal Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit, struck it down, said this was a violation of the First Amendment. Our judge in this case, with one sentence, said, that case didn't raise any First Amendment issues. Well, that's not true. It was a First Amendment case. It was struck down. That case is directly on point to our case. In this case, counselors, whether they're physicians and could be a psychiatrist.
How about pastors? How about pastors?
Pastors, if they're licensed counselors, would be involved with this, or licensed counselors that work with churches. If you're unlicensed, it doesn't apply, at least yet, because once this thing goes towards anyone who has a license, whether you're a pastor or whether you're a church counselor, the next step is to put it against everyone, licensed or unlicensed.
Hate speech.
And this is exactly that. This is saying that one kind of counsel, one kind of speech is banned, and this is the classic illustration of the radicalism of the homosexual agenda, trying to use the law to force people through a bully, forceful attempt into silence, and not only silence but acceptance. So counselors, like if a counselor comes in, take, for example, our counselors right now. They've got a counselor-client, doctor-patient relationship with these individuals that they've had for months, and sometimes longer than that. Now, on December 31, they're counseling them based upon how the client wants to be counseled. The client says, I've got these unwanted attractions. I have engaged in this behavior. I don't want to do it. Help me. Help me with this stress. Help me to resolve this conflict. I want to default towards my religious and moral values. Help me to do that. Well, December 31, they give them one counsel. January 1, they'll have to say, I can no longer counsel you. Or, by the way, all that counsel that we've had the last 6 months, year and a half,
it was wrong.
It was wrong. We're going to have to change 180 degrees. Now, how confusing is that? That's unbelievable. But this is California.
Yeah.
And, I just ask people to pray for this case because within the next 24 hours, we will be filing our emergency memo outlining the points why the court should intervene within this 30-day period and stop the enforcement of this law. This is urgent, and I can't underestimate how urgent this really is.
Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is not known for their conservative views, they're also suing, this time against a Jewish organization for what they say is consumer fraud. And they allege that the reparative therapy counseling failed in a particular instance. What's the comment on that?
Well, this Southern Poverty Law Center, they used to do a lot of things with regards to civil rights, with regards to KKK and the black community. But they realized that I think there's more money going into this other area where they've now changed, and that's in the homosexual agenda. And that's kind of where they focus right now. It's a very biased organization. They track what they call hate groups. They've put focus on the family or Family Research Council and those kinds of groups, listed them as hateful groups or hate groups. And the reason is because they believe in marriage as the union of one man, one woman. And that's how bizarre they are. Well, they filed this lawsuit in New Jersey, against some counselors. These are unlicensed counselors. These are life coaches is what they're called. And they're with a group called Jonah, which is a Jewish organization. And, in fact, the group from which these two men that they represent came from had 10 people that they were going through counseling. 8 of those individuals, of those 10, have now married. They are leading great lives. Their stress is gone. They're not acting on same-sex attractions. And they've got great testimonies. And once the lawsuit was filed, they have come forth and said, we will be willing to testify how good this counsel and therapy has been for us, how it's benefited our lives. But 2 of these individuals now say, well, it didn't help us. And so consequently, this is consumer fraud. You're saying that you can help us and you can't. And we didn't. And that's what they say. And so therefore they ought to shut them down. Well, let me ask you this. Is there any area of counseling where there's a 100% success rate?
No.
There's not. Take drug abuse, narcissism, anorexia, bulimia, any other kind of stress. There's no 100% success rate in counseling. There's a lot of other factors that people deal with. And the individuals that they represent have a lot of other issues going on in their lives that will ultimately come out in this litigation. But what they did was they filed a libelous, slanderous press release in the form of a court filing so that they could then promote it and trumpet it to the media. At the end of the day, they're going to lose this case.
If the law is not overturned in California, what are the ramifications for other states and for pastoral counseling as a whole?
Well, for other states, there's already been a bill like this one in California filed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Now, whether they'll be able to pass it, we don't know, but they were filed shortly after this law was passed. Then there's a legislator in San Francisco, a female member of Congress, and she has filed a resolution this week in Congress asking for this to be a federal law. Now, I don't think she'll get enough votes in Congress, but, this is where they're starting. They're wanting to make this a template across the country. Now, for pastors and other church counselors, if you're not licensed right now, it doesn't apply to you right now. But once they pass this, think of this. They're essentially saying that if you're licensed and you're experienced, you're trained in this area, you can't counsel. Mm-hmm. So what are they going to say eventually when they say, well, what about these pastors? They're not trained. These other church counselors, they may be life coaches. They're not trained. So let's stop them as well. Because if they think that they can do it among licensed counselors, all they have to do is quickly amend the law, and before you know it, churches, pastors, they're all going to come underneath this same bill. And that's the ultimate goal.
Now, Matt, sometimes we hear these things and absolutely feel helpless as to what we can. The Ninth Circuit goes off on some of the crazy tangents that they do, and we see this stuff happening. We need to pray, number one. But number two, is there anything that we as individuals can do?
Well, right now, you can go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org, lc.org, and you can financially help support Liberty Counsel. We're working round the clock with our litigation team, and we're working into the late hours of the night and early hours of the morning, and we'll be doing this until we ultimately get relief. So we're putting a lot of time in it at this time of the year. As it relates to signing a petition right now, it's not going to help right now in California, so we're not going to suggest that that's a possibility. At some point in time, in certain situations, that may be, like if it gets moving in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or some of these other states around the federal level. But right now, it's just we have to be there and we have to litigate day and night until this thing stops. And so prayer is absolutely essential. We've got less than 30 days to stop it. And your financial support certainly is helpful as well, because we're putting in a lot of time and resources to stop this bill. Well, it's going to have cataclysmic effect.
Well, I think of the travel expenses and getting, across the country as attorneys representing these cases. Yes. This doesn't happen with nothing.
No, we had three. I was out there, and we had two other attorneys with me that flew out to Sacramento, and we were there. We had to get in there on Thursday, and we didn't leave until Saturday. So, that is an expense, and that's just one of many areas of expense that we had to and will continue to have to incur.
Matt, before we go to the next item on my little list here, tell us about the young attorneys that you're training there in Lynchburg. I mean, you've got a law school there with how many young students that are preparing for law?
Well, we have right now in our law school about 270 law school students, and we're continuing to grow the residential program. We have about 1,000 other online students, not for the JD in law, but for the Master of Arts in Public Policy and Paralegal Studies. We have an AA and a BS in Paralegal Studies through the law school. It's completely online. We have a Master of Arts in Public Policy completely online through the law school as well. But we have some – here's a story, and in fact, maybe we ought to have her on sometime with a crosstalk. Her name is Megan Chapman. I'll give you an example of what we're training. Megan, about 7 years ago, was in Russell Springs, Kentucky. She was asked by her senior class to give the prayer for graduation. But the ACLU got a court order to say, Megan, you can't pray, and the school can't allow you to pray. So we got in touch with Megan. I spoke with her a few hours before graduation. I told Megan, in fact, that while we can get the order overturned, which we eventually did, we couldn't get it overturned in time for the graduation. We got it overturned after. But I said, listen, the order says you can't pray, but it doesn't say you can't talk about important people or important things. So she went to the graduation, and she gave her testimony and got standing ovations. Front page in the Louisville Courier-Journal, Fox News that night, and then on God's Christian Warriors 2-hour documentary that's gone worldwide. Came to Liberty University. In May of next year, she'll be graduating from Liberty University School of Law.
Oh, wow.
And it's these kinds of champions for Christ, men and women, that love the Lord, are being trained in law. They're going to defend and fight our liberties, whether they're going to be doing work like we're doing at Liberty Counsel, and some of them will. Some of them will be working in private practice, business. Some of them are teaching. Some are teaching at law schools right now. Some are working in Washington, D.C., and they're working with various kinds of entities. Some are clerking for state and federal judges, working in the court systems. So it's an amazing testimony of what's happening at Liberty University School of Law. And I'd encourage, if anyone knows or has a feeling that God has called you to law, or maybe, I would encourage you to come to Liberty University School of Law.
We're going to be having a break here shortly. But I want you to give out your website and address where people can get more information on these things.
Well, they can go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org, and you can find information about Liberty Counsel, about our other organizations, Liberty Counsel Action, as well as Liberty University School of Law. It's lc.org, and the phone number is easy. Just remember 671, and you got it, 800-671-1776. That's 800-671-1776.
Matt, we're going to be back in 60 seconds, and we're going to go to another topic. So stick with us, folks. Don't go away.
It's not easy to find a quiet place today. Those with children and those in the business world know the busy demands. And in today's technology, we're hearing phones buzzing, email reminders chiming, and text messages chirping. The hectic nature of life gets more intense, where multitasking becomes a 24/7 task. Sadly, it is often spending time with God each day that gets crowded out from busy schedules. To help you regain your focus, VCY is offering a new daily devotional by Nancy Lee DeMoss. It's called The Quiet Place, providing a daily devotional reading for each day of the year. It is the hope of Nancy DeMoss that these readings will stimulate your appetite to dig deeper into God's Word. In a flexible, leather-like binding, these devotionals combine Bible study with practical applications. Copies of The Quiet Place are available for a donation of $20 to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. It's a handy resource for yourself or to share with others. Call 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Our guest today, Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. And Matt, let's talk about DOMA. That's the Defense of Marriage Act. And, of course, our president has vowed that he will not defend it. I guess the Supreme Court's been experiencing, you've been dealing with this thing, a big question whether or not to accept any cases pertaining to DOMA or one man, one woman marriage. When do we expect to hear from the court, and what are the ramifications?
Well, we actually expected to hear from the court this week on Monday, but they didn't say anything, and so now it's going to be sometime in the future, but it's going to be in the near future. I think what they will do is they will take the one case that struck down what's called Section 3 of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. That's the section that defines marriage as the union of one man and one woman for federal purposes, meaning that you go by the federal definition of marriage for spouse. So if you're trying to file taxes, it's based on the common understanding of marriage. Or survivor benefits for Social Security, it's based upon the spouse of a heterosexual opposite-sex marriage. So that is the issue, and it's coming out of Massachusetts, where Massachusetts is trying to force the federal government to give people in Massachusetts benefits that other states don't get. So that's the case that's going to actually be taken because that struck down the provision, and that's going to be mandatory review. But the question about what's happening in California is harder. That's the Proposition 8 case. That's the state constitutional marriage amendment case that the Ninth Circuit struck down in a split decision. That was a very narrow decision and really only applies to California because of its laws that have essentially created homosexuality to be a status like other marriage relationships. And essentially what Prop 8 did was just the only thing that was left was the label of marriage. So that's going to be a very narrow case, and the question is whether the Supreme Court will take it because it's narrow and it won't affect the rest of the country per se. But on the other hand, if they don't take it, you've got a court changing the entire system in California for same-sex marriage. So I don't know what they're going to do with that. If they do not take it, then same-sex marriages take place in California. If they do take it, then the issue of whether or not a state can amend its own constitution is directly on point, and that's what they're going to be deciding. Either way, something regarding marriage and the definition of marriage will be decided by this court by June of 2013.
You know, Matt, every time I use the term and hear it discussed, same-sex marriage, I feel like I'm hallucinating.
Yeah, it's an oxymoron.
I mean, your mind says, well, this is, first of all, this is impossible from a biological sense and from a moral sense, and yet to even have it debated. I remember 10 years ago, we had our satellite truck up in Wausau, and there was a big hearing on a homosexual marriage. And that was 10 years ago. And I'll never forget hearing a guy, I was sitting on the spool of our cable feeding the truck, and I'm sitting there and hear this guy says, well, I think anybody ought to be able to marry whoever they want to. If they want to marry their horse, they can marry their horse. I mean, this kind of lunacy going on with no regard for God's creation. Well, I mean, I guess you throw God's creation out of the picture. You can marry a fence post, I guess.
Well, you can. You know, Anita actually put up on the Liberty Counsel website one time about a poem that she created about marrying a ficus, and somebody said, oh, that's just ridiculous. Well, about a day later, there was an article in Europe about a person in India that wanted to marry a ficus tree. And it was exactly the same. I mean, once you deconstruct marriage from the common understanding and what natural law would ultimately, and revealed law would say, is the union of a man and a woman, biologically compatible for that union, if you then say it's a different definition. It can be two people of the same sex. Well, then what you've done is you've just defined it to something that is illogical. And if it's two people of the same sex, then it can be three people. It can be four people. It can be polygamy. It can be polyamory, where you have a bunch of people in a group all marrying one another. And some of these homosexual relationships have become that bizarre. We have four people in a group where they've cross-inseminated each other and had different babies and then did cross adoptions. It's unbelievable the deconstruction that's happening of the family. And then when you do that, then marriage really becomes meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. And so what you've ultimately seen happen in some of these foreign countries is the family institution disintegrates and marriage ultimately declines.
Well, you know, Matt, as we see what went on years ago in the hippie culture, where it was all love, 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 and it was all intermingling in everything, including sexual behavior, that was, of course, breaking the law, at least some moral fiber. Now they're wanting to legitimatize it and make it legal.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's different here is not just let us go do X. Mm-hmm. You may not agree with it, but let us go do it. It's let us go do this, and we're going to force you to agree with it. Yeah. And if you don't, we're going to punish you. And that's what we have, like in California. That's what we have in these other situations with regards to a wedding photographer being forced to photograph a same-sex union.
Yep.
You know, it's not only do they want so-called tolerance, they want to then be intolerant towards you if you don't agree. And if you don't agree, they want to punish you and force you to agree by the force of law. So that's different than anything that we've ever seen before in this respect.
And any pastors listening today, pastors, listen carefully. Because what happened in Scandinavia with the Reverend Aka Green and those who are in Canada and other countries where it is against the law to speak in any negative terms regarding this lifestyle, it won't unless God intervenes and the people of America wake up and start sending people to Congress that have got half an ounce of common sense. We're going to be ending up with pastors that are muzzled. Tape across their mouth, and don't you dare even talk bad about the issue of man marrying a man or women marrying men. I mean, we've got women preachers now that are living with their lesbian lifestyle persons, and likewise in the opposite gender, and it's being ordained by major denominations that in years past would never have considered it, and today it's everywhere.
Well, and you mentioned earlier the Southern Poverty Law Center. Mm-hmm. That particular group, because you believe in marriage as one man and one woman, thinks that you are engaging in hate speech, and if your group stands for that, then it's a hate group. And it's the same thing that happened with Chick-fil-A. Remember when the Chick-fil-A head said, I believe in the biblical definition of marriage as one man, one woman?
Hate
That's all
speech.
He said.
Yep.
That's hate speech. You can't have your restaurant here in my city. And that happened in more than one city by government officials. So just because, you think, well, hate speech, I wouldn't be hateful. But what they think of as hateful is marriage is the union of one man and one woman. Marriage, if you believe in man-woman marriage, that's hate speech, and that is something they want to punish.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are thinking, of course, about God creating man and woman, and God designing it. And what's happened is that we have men that have decided that they are God. And they are restructuring the entire moral culture and the genetic culture, everything. Cloning is still something people are playing with, and all of the other issues. But when man forgets God, havoc reigns. And when they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to reprobate minds. The Scriptures tell us that. Now, let's go on to another topic. Matt, we'll be praying on this issue. Obamacare.
Yes.
Some new life was breathed into your lawsuit by the Supreme Court pertaining to Obamacare. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's a huge situation. Liberty Counsel filed the very first private lawsuit in the country on March 23, 2010, against Obamacare. And we represent Liberty University, which is the largest Christian university in the world, and private individuals. We challenge the individual and the employer mandate. I argued it at the federal court and then at the Court of Appeals, and there the court said they're not going to reach the merits of our arguments. They're going to instead say that the federal anti-injunction law says that you can't do this right now until you pay the tax. And that wouldn't be until 2014 or 2015. So we asked the United States Supreme Court to review the case. And the Supreme Court actually placed as the first day of the 3 days of oral argument our issue on the docket, which was the Anti-Injunction Act. Mm-hmm. Well, when the court came back with its decision in June, it ruled that it doesn't apply. But unfortunately, they upheld the individual mandate wrongly, but I believe they did a wrong decision, but they nevertheless did. Then they just simply dismissed our case. Done. We then filed a petition and said, no, you got to reverse your decision. Rehear this case. And amazingly, in a rare move, the Supreme Court reversed its decision and said, you're right. There's still issues that need to be addressed. When they looked at the issue, they ordered the Federal Court of Appeals to rehear our case, which means I'll go back now and argue early 2013 and have a decision sometime shortly after that on the employer mandate. So here's where we are now. Huge change of situation. It shocked the country. It was the top news story for a couple of days. And, in fact, I'll argue whether or not the employer mandate is constitutional at all, whether Congress has the authority to pass it. I'm arguing that they don't. I don't believe Congress has that authority. And if that wins the day, it'll strike it down completely for religious and secular employers. The second thing is, if for some reason the court were to uphold it, then it violates the free exercise of religion. Why? Because it's forcing religious employers to fund abortion, like Liberty University. Mm-hmm. This is not tangential to Liberty University. This is a core doctrine of our belief that life begins at conception. God is the author of life. We can't participate in murder, and we won't cross that line. That's a collision course that's happening in 2013. So that's, I think, a very strong argument. And I'm also arguing that the individual mandate that the court upheld also violates the free exercise of religion for the same reason, because individuals, like employers, will be assessed a fee, and that fee goes towards the funding of abortion, contraception, and sterilization, just like the employers.
And, Matt, as we look, companies already, just hours after the new election, people were announcing downsizing, knowing that this insurance thing is going to affect their economy. Yeah. Cutting down on staff, going and taking full-time people and putting them on part-time. All of this type of thing and it's going to affect not just churches or Christian organizations. You said even secular employers. Yeah,
and even secular. Like Orlando Regional Medical Center is a very large hospital and medical center in Central Florida in Orlando. And they announced the biggest layoff in their 100-plus year history and said it's because of Obamacare. Now, this is a medical facility that's actually laying off people more so than they've done in their 100-plus years of existence because of Obamacare. So the people that are going to need medical treatment are not going to have the facility down there.
And the stories of physicians that are considering going into other work. Right?
Yeah, and so, with regards to the religious issue, whether it's Protestant, Roman Catholic, Jewish, whatever it might be, the collision's coming in 2013. For Liberty, it's July 1 because the fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30. Mm-hmm. And that's when we do the annual renewal for the insurance. Now, Liberty's self-insured. So that's when Obamacare kicks in for Liberty University on this forced abortion funding. For other groups, it may be a different time. But 2013 is a train wreck happening.
We will be right back in 60 seconds. This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Our lines are open if you'd like to call and ask questions or comments. 800-733-9829. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. I know that there are many people today that struggle with fear and anxiety and worry and depression. And as we've learned in our last few commentaries, God does not desire for us to live that way. In fact, Proverbs 12:25 says that anxiety causes depression. Worry brings anxiety. We see that in Luke chapter 12, verses 22 to 32, and in Philippians 4:19. Wrong priorities also bring despair. And a spirit of fear does not come from God. We know that. And we know that God takes care of the righteous. May I ask you today, are you living a righteous life? Are you living a life rightfully in obedience to God's word? Anxiety also calls into question God's power, his provision, his priority, meaning you and I. He loves us, he cares for us, he gave his life for us, and his providence, his divine guidance. Stop the sin of worrying today and get into God's word.
Our phone lines are jammed from all across the country here. We're going to go immediately to Mike in Bayview, Wisconsin. And Mike, you're online with Matt Staver.
Yeah, God bless you both. What a wonderful show you guys have. I'll get right to it. Romans 13, when man makes unjust law contrary to God's law, are we not supposed to disobey it?
Well, I think that there is this principle of higher law, and that has been a historic principle throughout the ages. Blackstone talked about it, and that man-made law must conform to these higher law principles. And there comes a time, Martin Luther King Jr., when he was in the Birmingham jail, talked about this. They asked, why do you disobey some of these laws? And he says, well, some are unjust. Why? Well, because they're contrary to God's law. This is a situation where it is a direct collision. This is not where you can exercise your religious belief and be inconvenienced by an irritating law. This is either or. Either you violate your religious conscience and obey Obamacare, or you violate your religious conscience and disobey Obamacare, and there's nothing in between. There's just no in between. It's not coexistence. You can't have them both. It's a train on the same track running in opposite directions, and the collision is coming, and a decision will have to be made.
We're going to go to Burlington and talk with Edie.
Hi, I had just a question or an insight, maybe. I was thinking that since Christians, pastors, and counselors don't understand homosexuality as being a state of being, that technically speaking, you're not encouraging a change, like from one state to another. We simply understand it as a sin to be repented of or dealt with. So how could they really actually stop Christian counselors and pastors from just saying, I'm happy to pray with you, I'm happy to read scriptures? I mean, they can't stop their freedom of speech.
Well, yes, that's what they're trying to do. You got a client that comes in and says, I haven't acted on these same-sex attractions. I'm conflicted because I've got these religious moral values. Can you help me? And you can only say, I'm going to pray for you so many times. Okay, I understand. I got that you're praying for me. Can you give me some advice? I'm going to pray for you. I understand that. Appreciate it. But we've got a 30-minute, an hour counseling session here. Can you help me on how I can go about it? What's happening? How can I deal with this? The counselor is going to have to either say, the stress that you're feeling, no big deal. We got to work on your religious views. Or counselor is going to have to go with what the client wants, not wanting to act on those feelings. And they're going to have to give them some counsel about that. If they say anything that it's wrong, then they've violated the law. On the other hand, if you got somebody who's coming in and they're engaging in same-sex activity, behavior, it's the same thing. They don't want to do it. So they want to give them some information about how it's risky, how it's not right. They're going to violate the law. If, in fact, somebody comes in and they have mannerisms, they might have effeminate mannerisms, and they don't want to have those effeminate mannerisms, maybe in their speech or maybe in how they're doing their mannerisms. If they ultimately try to counsel them towards more masculine mannerisms or vice versa, towards more feminine mannerisms if they're female, they are ultimately violating the law. It is a very broad perspective on this law, and virtually anything a counselor does is going to be violating the law unless somehow you affirm them. What happens if you have somebody coming in and they're bisexual? They're engaging in sex with both genders, and they want to stop one or the other. What's a counselor to do? I mean, the problem is that these counselors are stuck. They are going to violate this law no matter what they do. And if they have a religious conviction, they can't just simply be silent, and they can't just simply say for 30 minutes, I'm going to pray for you.
Jerry's on the road in Wisconsin. Jerry, you're on the air.
Yeah, say I'm a truck driver and courier expediter. Anyway, if I don't want to pay, I don't want one single penny of my income going to kill babies, and I wish that they would get the word abortion out of the dictionary and put kill babies there, because if people would start saying you're killing babies, I don't know why abortion seems to be just a polite way of saying, killing babies, but people don't. I've talked to different people. They never, when I say it's killing babies, don't use the word abortion. Oh, well, no, it isn't. They argue that concept of the word.
Yeah. No, good point. I mean, if you have the genocide that happens over in some countries, you're not saying that people are being aborted. I think, there's a lot of euphemisms that people use to try to avoid the reality of the fact that babies are being murdered in the womb. Innocent babies are not just being murdered, but they're being slaughtered. They're being tortured in the room by virtue of the mechanisms of abortion. And I think that we need to face the stark reality of what's happening.
Matt, with the economic problem we're facing, we have just killed 50 million taxpayers.
Yeah, they have. One every 20 seconds. We kill one every 20 seconds, every minute of the day. That's astounding. We abort more children in one day than the lives that were lost in the World Trade Center. So you have the World Trade Center plus some more. That's what happens every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Matt, we are out of time. I want to say to our callers, Ed in Minnesota, Nancy in Marion, Indiana, and Jan in Upper Michigan, I wish we had time to have you on, but we don't. It's not going to work out. But, Matt, I want you to know you have our prayers. There are thousands of people listening to you today all across the network that will remember to pray for you as you stand before the Supreme Court and all of the other magistrates as well.
Well, thank you, Vic. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
And as one more time on the points of contact.
Our website is lc.org. Liberty Counsel's website is lc.org, and the phone number is 800-671-1776. That's 800-671-1776 or lc.org.
Matt, tell all the staff we're praying for them, okay?
Thank you.
And
God bless.
God bless you. Have a blessed day. Well, that's it, folks. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk. And tell a friend, invite them to listen as we endeavor to bring the message of liberty and freedom and God's plan of salvation to thousands of people even today. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
Listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.